Let's look at the multi-store model in around 7 minutes. So if you get the ERQ, as always, your introduction. So the multi-store model talks about different stores of memory, and it's evidenced by the studies of Glanzer and Kunitz and the case study of Brenda Milner, because it's not an experiment or your usual study, it's a case study. So then you look at the keywords. We're going to define these: the first study, the first grave, next study, next grave, as you already know, and at the end we're going to look at the coda. The multi-store model states that if there's an environmental stimuli, it will be sensed and registered. However, if you do not pay attention to it, it will be forgotten. If you do pay attention, it will be registered into your short-term memory. And if it is rehearsed, it will enter your long-term memory. Then it can be retrieved and remembered. Also, make sure to memorize the encoding capacity and duration for each of these stores of memory, because you need to include it in your ERQ. So take some time to write this down if you haven't already. Let's look at the case study of HM. So this man had his hippocampus removed, and his different types of memory were tested using a triangulation of methods. They saw that he developed retrograde amnesia, which means he couldn't remember past memories. In this case, I've written declarative memories, but you don't have to be this specific. And anterograde amnesia, so he couldn't form new memories. The duration of his STM was healthy, because remember that an STM will typically have a duration of around 18 to 30 seconds. However, he could not rehearse this information into his long-term memory due to damage. His motor skills or muscle memory was intact, also known as procedural memory, and his episodic LTM, which basically means his memory of past and personal experiences, was severely damaged, and his general knowledge of the world, also known as semantic memory, would work sometimes. So as a conclusion, there are separate stores of memory. So as we saw before, the short-term memory, the long-term memory, and they have localized functions, because the hippocampus is responsible for the formation of declarative memories, which is basically any memory that is not procedural. This case study benefits from ecological validity because Milner did not create any artificial settings for patient HM. It also benefits from internal validity because the triangulation of methods that we saw before came to the same results when testing HM's memory. However, this study cannot be replicated because it is a unique case study, so it suffers in reliability. It also suffers in internal validity a little bit, because the results we saw could have been caused by epilepsies and heavy medication intake that you should know from HM's story. If you haven't looked at it already, I heavily recommend doing so. For this study, it is very important to understand what the serial effect is. So it is basically when you tend to remember the first and last things of a list more than, let's say, the things in the middle. It's divided into primary and recency effects. The primary effect is when you tend to remember the first things in the list, while the recency effect is when you tend to remember the last or more recent things in the list. Looking at the procedure, 46 US Army males, they were shown 15 lists of 15 words that were read out randomly and individually, very important, with a 2-second delay between words. Ignore this. And they were allocated to the 3 conditions with a repeated measures design, so they experienced all of these conditions. If they saw a hashtag, they would recall immediately with no delay. They could see a number and have a 10-second delay plus an interference task, not text, or see a number but have a 30-second delay with that same task, which involves counting in threes from the number that they were given. So researchers recorded the number of words recalled per participant and from what position. In the first condition, the items were better recalled if they were in the start or end of the list, so primary and recency effects were present. In the 10-second delay, the recency effect was significantly reduced and it was completely gone with the 30-second delay. So in conclusion, this is the conclusion. So the conclusion is that the primary effect was present because the items that were in the early part of the list were better remembered because they have already been rehearsed and stored in the LTM. So when you'll see a list and you're asked to remember it, you'll usually rehearse the early items or things in that list, I suppose. The recency effect was also remembered because they are still in the short-term memory, which has a duration of 18 to 30 seconds as we saw before. So if you saw the last item on the list or the last items on the list 20 seconds ago, then they will still be in your short-term memory. The serial effect then proves that there's two stores of memory because the primary effect involved the long-term memory and the recency effect involved the short-term memory. Glanzer-Conitz benefits from reliability due to its highly standardized procedure, unlike the case study of Bender-Milner. It also has high internal validity due to the IV manipulation, in this case the method of recall, so there's immediate recall with a 10-second or a 30-second delay. It also lacks population validity, so looking at the cons, due to the sample being small at only 46 participants, which are only males in the US Army. Lastly, it lacks ecological validity because one does not usually recall in controlled conditions. So the multi-store model benefits from credibility because the case study of Milner or HM is biological evidence, while Glanzer and Conitz is cognitive evidence, so it has both. It can be applied to understand how memory works and different methods to enhance our memory. Remember that an example is memory chunking. Moving on to the weaknesses, so one of them would be that it is argued studies such as Glanzer-Conitz are too artificial in nature, therefore lacking ecological validity. And if we compare this model to the model or theory of constructive memory, it does not explain memory distortion or the role of emotion. Just remember that this and the grave need to be in PO format, so if you want to practice that, there's free flashcards in this video's description. You could also be tested on the multi-store model in the form of an SAQ. So this is the question you would get for an SAQ. So explain one study of one model of memory. You could also talk about the working memory model because it's not stating which one specifically. This question is, so explain one study of MSM multi-store model. You can also get an ERQ where you compare this model to the working memory model. I have a video for that as well. So in case you get the SAQ, this would be the structure, so the keywords we saw before, the study of Milner. You can also do Glanzer and Conitz, I suppose, but I think Milner is shorter and easier to understand. And we're going to look at this paragraph, which I think is the hardest one. My point is that Milner provides strong support for the existence of separate memory stores, which is basically the main concept of the multi-store model, and this is evidenced by his healthy short-term memory that had a duration of 20 seconds, which is in the healthy or usual range of 18 to 30 seconds. However, his LTM was damaged in the form of amnesias. And now I give my explanation, which I have to say, writing an explanation for this last paragraph is so hard. You need to have a great understanding of the keywords and try and mention them all. So I recommend you read this, and any questions can go in the comments. But the main concept is that because one of the stores was damaged and the other wasn't, it indicates for the existence of different stores. And because some processes were damaged and some others were not, it also indicates for the existence of different processes. So for example, he could not rehearse information into his LTM, but he could pay attention to information in the sensory register, and so it would enter his short-term memory.